want to welcome you all to what is our third online symposium, sponsored by the Institute of General Semantics. The theme of this symposium, such as it is, continues the theme from last fall's in-person symposium, Non-Aristotelian Perspectives, Ecological Approaches, and the Anthropocene. So this is part two, but of course we are open and interested in all sorts of different ideas. I just would like to say a few words from our sponsor. If those of you that don't know me, my name is Lance Strate, and I am the president of the Institute of General Semantics, which was founded in 1938 by Alfred Korzybski. And I want to just encourage you all, if you are not already members of the Institute, to please join it for really a very modest amount. You get, first of all, a subscription to our quarterly journal, etc., a review of general semantics. Tom Gencarelli, who is on the Zoom, he's waving right now if you can see him, is the editor of etc. Running a little bit behind schedule, but for those of you that were members for 2023, the final issue is in transit right now and will be out, and there are 4 issues to come, including the first issue of this year, which will be the continuation, the second part of a special issue on politics related to general semantics. And in addition to the journal, which is open, we publish, of course, about general semantics, but also about related areas of interest having to do with media, communication, general systems and information and cybernetics. And we also publish poetry and all kinds of, again, intellectually stimulating kind of material. We also publish books. We just recently published the 6th edition of Alfred Korzybski's Science and Sanity, which was originally published in 1933 and is kind of the urtext, if you like, of general semantics. But we publish many other interesting and stimulating kinds of volumes, including having a series on creative expression, poetry, and art as well. In addition to that, we hold various online events such as this one, and every year we have our annual Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture, followed by an in-person symposium. This year, the Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture, which takes place in New York City, will be held on September 20th, and the Korzybski lecturer is Marianne Wolf, who is an author and scholar of education, best known for bringing kind of neurological research to the study of reading, and so how literacy affects brain structure and function, and also its effects on us as human beings, making us more empathetic, for example, as well as better educated in many ways. So that's going to be the Korzybski lecture, and the symposium theme for this coming year is communication, consciousness, and culture. As always, it's open to a wide variety of kinds of submissions. And along with that, we have really a lovely dinner. Along with the Korzybski lecture, we've been having musical performances as well. And this takes place at the Players Club in New York City, a 19th century institution with a lot of history, a club devoted to theater and the arts. So all of that makes for truly memorable event. And I encourage you all to come and join us if you can. And the call for Well, the registration for the event is now available on the IGS website, along with the call for submissions for proposals and papers is up there. I should mention that this coming Wednesday at the Players, we're hosting a film screening for Man on a Mission, a film about arts education that was produced by Robert Albrecht, who is one of many media ecology scholars associated with the Institute. And we are also running a seminar that folks can register for, and that does come with a fee, but that'll be held in London in July. And again, that information on that is on the website as well. So I invite you all to join us for these and other events and to become members of the Institute if you're not already. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend, longtime friend and colleague, and the secretary of the Institute of General Semantics, Eva Berger, who is a professor of communication at the College of Management Academic Studies in Tel Aviv, who will be the moderator for the first session, which starts right now. So take it away, Eva.
Thanks, Lance. It's nice to see you all. You have all of the details about the different presentations available from the program. So I will just be presenting the name of the presenter and the title of their paper. I will be sending you a private message 5 minutes before you're up. You each have not more than 15 minutes, up to 15 minutes. I know when we're presenting, we're sort of concentrated on what we're talking about, but try to pay attention. If you get like a little message on your screen, it's going to be me bothering you to start coming to an end. And having said that, we'll move right on. We'll each have maximum of 15 minutes. And then if we're good with time, there'll be some time left for Q&A. So our first presenter is Chris Chesher from the University of Sydney, Australia. And the topic of his paper is Robothespian as Invocational Actant. Chris?
Hi, just going to do the share screen ritual here. And it's always an awkward pause when you try to get all of your equipment working. Yeah, here we go. Okay, slide looking okay for you, everybody? Yep. So some background. I recently published a book that I'll mention in a moment, which is called Invocational Media: Reconceptualizing the Computer. And I've also been working for about 10 years on looking at robotics. And I published the book, and then I realized I hadn't actually created a space for robotics in the way that I'd been conceptualizing invocational media, and that I really needed to have a concept that would bring them together. And that's where the invocational actant comes in. So that's just a bit of prelude. Standing at over 6 feet tall in an enclosure in the Petrosane's Discovery Centre in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Robothespian scans the crowd gathered around him. He occasionally breaks into theatrical routines, gesticulating with his arms, and occasionally changing his appearance through movement, lights, and small screens for his eyes. His eyes change to a squinting clit eastward. His face and body glow orange and red, while he whistles the theme of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Robothespian is certainly an actor, but also in Bruno Latour's actor network theory sense, an actant. That is, not only is he an actor capable of entertaining a crowd, but he's also one actant in a larger network of actants that stabilize him in this space of edutainment in the corporate-funded science museum. He could well be a human actor, but that would not be as cool. And Robothespian earns his keep by performing here for many years. Not all robots are this stable, physically or ontologically. As the robot was first released in 2009, Robothespian sustained popularity in science museums and research labs around the world, suggests that it continues to raise socio-technical questions, just in the way that it performs and presents itself, with some resonance despite being technologically quite dated. Observing Robothespian, I wonder to what extent his actions, singing, dancing, addressing the crowd, are equivalent to human actions. Are these actions social actions? Or does he remain, despite his animacy, an instrumental and lifeless object? Can his choices and actions be judged as morally good or bad? Or are such judgments attributable only to the designers or the owners? Is he legally entitled to act? Can he be made legally responsible for his actions? Can he be attributed personhood? These are really big questions that I'm not going to go into too much depth with because I've only got 15 minutes. In this paper, I'll explore the limits of these questions by examining the features of the Robothespian itself and tracing the networks of actants that constitute and nourish it. This analysis draws from my own observations at the Petrosane's Discovery Center in KL, research through online videos, news stories, promotional material, and technical documentation. Robothespian is invocational because he's animated through software-mediated calls that summon his components to act. His body is made of invocable motors and hydraulics mapped to be controlled by software. His body, head, arm, face, and so on can be called into action through code and human interactions. Its invocability makes it lively, it makes it other, it makes it a physical and social actant. Beyond the initial invocation that calls Robothespian into action, the boot up, the robot becomes capable of ongoing invocation reaction, where the actions sort of flow into one another, constantly calling its instructions and remaining open to further invocations through sensors and the control panel for controlling the robot's movements and making requests from the performer's repertoire. And this is the control panel that that users of the Robothespian can use to trigger or to invoke the various responses. They can see what the robot sees, they can change its eyes and so on, which are all kind of acts of minor invocation. The traditional invocation is an ancient practice of calling on a god or higher authority for assistance or guidance at a moment of crisis. It's familiar from Greek mythology, like Homer's Odyssey, which begins with an invocation to the muses, seeking inspiration, almost permission for telling the story. And it's taken up again in poetry and humanist poetry and beyond. But the invocation is more than poetic. Democratic politicians invoke the mandate of voters. Autocrats might invoke the unity of a nation. We academics perform invocations every time we cite an author's work. So more broadly, an invocation is a ritualized call to cultural resources and authority for guidance, information, and action. But invocation is also, there's the quote. Invocation is also a term used in computing discourse to refer to calls to methods or functions. Beyond articulating direct instructions, the invocation calls on outside resources that are available to the programmer or to the medium. This metaphor can be extended to refer to all events mediated by these devices, these invocational media. In the book, Invocational Media Reconceptualizing the Computer, I developed this concept in depth, employing the metaphor of invocation to isolate what I call the genetic element, or Deleuze actually refers to as the genetic element of all computers, the characteristic abstract machine that defines the medium. At the lowest level of the invocational abstract machine is the fetch-execute cycle, and everything that it does is mediated through invocations of the CPU, input and output devices, memory and storage. Some common invocations are invoking records from memory, invoking symbolic operations like language and mathematics, but also invoking immersive spatial illusions or invoking the rules of games. But invocable actants like robots, non-playing characters in games, robot vacuum cleaners, chatbots, automata, and so on, all of these are called into action to continue act with minimal intervention. When in operation, these actions can seem to have a sense of identity, purpose, persona, agency. Invocational actants based on digital technologies and using sensors and processors and effectors can produce the most complex behaviors. And some of these perform planned and reactive invocation reactions, constantly articulating their own internal invocations and remaining open to senses. So here I'm going to turn to David Gunkel's work. He talks about making a rigid distinction between robot and person is no longer adequate to understanding contemporary and possible robots. And he argues that robots with AI and machine learning are capable of behavior that transcends the capabilities of previous technologies. So would he say that these invocational actants, I guess he would say that they create a huge kind of epistemological and ontological challenge, that he says that robots are increasingly designed, promoted, and experienced as social actors. And he points out that critics who claim technologies are incapable of action, who attribute all actions performed by robots to its designers, wrongly locate responsibility entirely outside the site of these actions. So I should have called this sort of chapter 2. It's making a big jump here. Gunkel employs Heidegger's reading of the thing prior to it becoming an object, and Derrida's deconstructive method to contest the linguistic and ontological exceptionalism that excludes robots from the domain of action and personhood. He argues we need new categories to accommodate shifts in the reality of human-machine relations. I'm actually going to go straight back to I'm going to argue that Gunkel is right to contest the essentialist assumption that things can never act, but I'll question the purported ontological shift with the emergence of robots that requires a re-examination of the status of people and things. This re-examination has already been performed in science and technology studies with actor network theory, or ANT, which begins by insisting on a symmetrical approach to people and things by considering both as actors or as actants. For actor network theorists, human and non-human actants were never ontologically distinct. Action is action without necessary distinct origin. Almost all actions are hybrid events. Any attributions of agency or intentionality for the person or thing held responsible is decided through further actors in moral, legal, and political discourses, through texts, lawyers, courtrooms, and so on. So robots like Robothespian perform actions that complicate the attribution of agency, not because they exceed the conventional categories of human and thing, but because they're hyperconnected and engineered invocational assemblages. The complexity of the assemblage is partly apparent in the robot's sensors, microprocessors, networks, software, and motors, but this technical complexity can be traced to a much wider network of human and non-human actants. It's common to seek an origin story for a robot like Robothespian. So when we might start with the designers at Engineered Arts in Cornwall and Southwest West England, but the designer's decision-making was only partly responsible for Robothespian. It required the enrollment of many other actors, component suppliers, capital. One of the key actors and people as well, these are the management team. One of the key actants, the invocational actants, is the robot's face. While it's highly stylized, it serves as an attractor for the visitor's attention. Central to the impression of liveliness, it becomes a singular node in the visitor's field of vision. Its animated eyes are square screens, and its mouth is a hinged element, invocations of facial features rather than representations. The face changes color with lights underneath the translucent skin. Another actant is that the space, this is a simulation of the gallery, the museum space. The space itself is an actant, so that the invocations take place within a particular location. As a technology from the 2010s, the Robothespian falls well short of the ideal robot imagined by those questing for general intelligence and for robots indistinguishable from humans. But this is now the 2024 model of what the robot should be, which is the kind of all singing. But I guess what's interesting about this is that these bodies lack faces, and so although they are invocational, they have lost the sense of faciality that was so crucial to Robothespian. I'm just wondering why these invocational actants are sort of being presented in this way today. Sorry, I hope I made some sense. I feel like I didn't, but
You definitely did. Thank you, Chris. Just in time. I don't know
thank
if you
you.
see my messages. I feel bad interrupting,
Yeah.
but you did a great job. As I said, we'll have time for questions at the end of all of the presentations. So now we move on to our second presentation by Tanima Bagchi from Shiv Nadar University, Chennai, India. And the title of her paper is Pragmatic Analysis of Deixis in Indian Stand-Up Comedy. Tanima?
I'll share my screen now.
Yes, you can share your screen.
I hope my screen is visible.
And there's some noise. I don't know if that's behind you or someone has their mic open.
I took care of it.
Thank you, Lance. Okay,
From India. So the
Go
topic
ahead.
of my presentation is Pragmatic Analysis of Taxes in Indian Stand-Up Comedy. And I try to keep it short because of the time constraint. So the roadmap for my presentation today is I'll talk a little bit about what is stand-up comedy in general and also in India, the aim and objectives of this presentation, some pragmatic and then I'll move on to the analysis, that is pragmatic analysis of taxes, and finally I am new to this concept of general semantics, but I am trying to incorporate the concepts from general semantics into stand-up comedy. So that will be my attempt in this presentation as well, and then I'll wind up my presentation. Okay. So when we talk about humor, rhetoric, and comedy, so humor is an intentional, conspicuous act of playful cleverness, which has been mentioned by Berger in 2018. And there are three theories of humor, which we call as superiority theory, incongruity theory, and relief theory. So when we talk about superiority theory, it's about if there's two parties involved, say A and B. So the person who is listening, so there is a feeling of superiority because that humor that situation doesn't apply to this person, and therefore that person feels superior to the other person. So that is superiority theory. And then incongruity theory is when the expected outcome of the humor or the joke is not something that that is different from what the person has expected. And finally, we have another one, which is called the relief theory, which is like a relief because of some social taboo or a negative effect which has been reduced by the joke itself. So there are three different theories, and when we look into the stand-up routines, we'll see that all these theories apply to that to each routine. So now, when we talk about humor, of course, there is we talk also about laughter, but humor is something which is like a stimulus, and response to that stimulus, to that humor, is laughter. So it's not the same thing, but it's a little different. And then there is, and then we talk about humor as a like cognitive trigger, and there's also a connection between humor and rhetoric in terms of intentionality and artistic form. And of course, there is also humor and comedy. So I've tried in this particular slide, what I try to do is I try to see humor, rhetoric, and comedy as three different terms, but how they're related to each other. So when we talk about humor and comedy, we talk about the similar responsibility towards the social relevance, which leads, and that is important, which leads the audience onto a transitional path of being more open and cordial to apparently dormant perspectives. So this is the aim of this paper, that investigating stand-up routines from a socio-pragmatic perspective. And there are two objectives, as I earlier mentioned, that utilization of social judgment theory to analyze the correlation between persuasion and humor, which is there in stand-up comedy in general, and also utilizing some concepts from gender semantics to understand stand-up comedy. So when we talk about stand-up comedy in general, there is a significant similarity which is there between conversational joking and stand-up comedy. They are both live performances which make demands on the participants not only as interpreters of a text but as negotiators of a specific social environment. So, but of course, stand-up comedy, when we talk about stand-up comedy and conversational joking, there is the involvement of the audience or the listener is more in conversational joking than the stand-up comedy. But there is also an important part in stand-up comedy, which is group dynamics. And so the success of stand-up comedy is linked to the group dynamics, because no one, and that's why you would see whenever there is a stand-up performance, the audience laughs together. So because primarily owing to the fact that no one wants to be caught laughing alone, as a heartfelt laughter seems to be in need of an echo. So both stand-up performers and the audience are attached to shared cultural knowledge, which is very important for a stand-up performance. Such that when the performers assign utterances, actions, behaviors, and attitudes to their performances, the audience responds favorably. And so stand-up comedy is often compared to public speaking. Now when we talk about stand-up comedy in India, there has been a significant transition in the nature of humor from Hasya Kavi Sammelan, which was like a group or an meeting of the people who can make the others laugh. So that's Hasya Kavi Sammelan in the initial phases of comedy, where it revolves around the struggles of the common man to live stand-ups, where the storyline is completely shifted from innocent to double meaning jokes. And so stand-up comedy forms an integral part of the public sphere, because which primarily aims at not the elimination or suppression of difference, but rather its constant negotiation and entailing appreciation of divergent perspectives. And the popularity of stand-up comedy in Indian social scenario is a number of different factors, which results from the establishment of pop culture in India to the global recession and return of some non-resident Indians, resulting in this new English-speaking middle class audience, which is Western in its viewpoint, with the content largely drawn from the local milieu. And also, his stand-up comedy in India is a manifestation of the independence rendered to public sphere, which has been compromised recently, which was mentioned by Paul in 2017. Now I'll look into the stand-up routines to understand, but before that, a little bit about the social judgment theory. So Musawir Sharif, Caroline Wood Sharif, and Carl Hovland are the central figures of the social judgment theory. And the process of it says that the process of judgment that involves integration of information from a set of proximal cues available in the physical and social environment of the individual into a judgment about some distal state of affairs. So if an issue is considered to be important for the individual, the person's own attitude would serve as an anchor in the psychological process of perception and judgment. So therefore, there are two things which are involved in the social judgment theory. One is called the attitude structure and the other one is called the ego involvement. Attitude structure, it involves three types: latitude of acceptance, latitude of rejection, and latitude of non-commitment. Latitude of acceptance includes all those events or all those viewpoints which are accepted by the individual. Latitude of rejection, of course, includes, as the name implies, all those viewpoints which the individual will not accept at all. And latitude of non-commitment involves all those viewpoints which the person or the individual is undecided about. So when we talk about ego involvement, which means the self-involvement, so in attitude structure varies with the degree of self. So self-involvement is directly proportional to latitude of rejection. So that means if a person rejects a particular viewpoint, the involvement of the self is it's a lot of self-involvement is there, and the other one is the latitude of acceptance, where there is the involvement, self-involvement is relatively constant. And finally, the latitude of non-commitment, it's inversely proportional. So the more someone is undecided about something, the less they are self-involved with that particular viewpoint or that particular event. So the basic idea of that stand-up comedy is to shift people when they are they're definitely from latitude of rejection and latitude of acceptance. It's not possible because an individual is already decided or has made up his mind that this is something which I want to accept and this is something which I want to reject. But it's the latitude of non-commitment which becomes crucial for a stand-up performer, because within that scenario.
Sure.
Hello. So in that, in the latitude of non-commitment, the performer can persuade the audience to shift their perspectives, and which becomes important for a stand-up performance. So once the persuader identifies the degree of self-involvement of the audience through use of an ordered alternative questionnaire, the message can be designed accordingly in order to be successful. So therefore, it is used to explore the apparently uncomfortable social issues with an aim of persuading the audience to shift their performance perspectives towards contested viewpoints for consideration. And now some data. Please let me know if you can hear it.
Now let's talk about Bombay Airport.
Is the audio, can you hear this video with the sound?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Inside the Bombay Airport, Mumbai Airport, there is this huge hoarding of a pregnant Kareena Kapoor holding pregnancy. Yeah. And every time I see it, I'm just like, who the fuck is coming to airports and taking pregnancy tests?
So I'll not play the entire video because it would take a lot of time. I'll just, because most of these performances are in Indian English and Hindi. So the sentences which are in English, in Hindi, I've tried to translate it here. This is the first extract, and this is the translation. So here, the pause by the comedian in line 3, followed by audience reaction in the form of laughter, works as an evaluation of the degree of self-involvement of audience by the persuader. So through the image of a celebrity endorsing a pregnancy test kit inside an airport, the speaker sets the stage, raising an important question: the affordability of a pregnancy test kit for women belonging to economically weaker sections. And this issue not only involves someone who has experienced pregnancy, for whom the degree of self-involvement would presumably be higher, but anyone irrespective of gender, age, and status who realizes it and in a way supports the importance of affordable pregnancy test kits. In lines 8 and 10, the humor is generated by utilizing the rhythmic song employed in the beginning of a musical parlor game called Antakshari, or the game of ending letter, for a situation wherein a woman decides to take a pregnancy test. So by comparing the fun associated with a social activity to the anxiety associated with such a test, the speaker persuades the audience to rethink the appropriateness of locations used for impactful advertising campaigns. And the tagline of this advertisement, as mentioned in line 14, brings to the attention of audience deep-seated social taboo in India, which is an unmarried pregnant woman. So while association of good news with a pregnancy test contextualizes the woman in a marital relationship where childbearing is appreciated as an ability and a priority that supersedes every other aspiration of a married woman, absence of linguistic expressions like but, if you want, or tagline of a pregnancy test kit, as mentioned in line 15, indicates how a married woman is devoid of agency in terms of choice of the pregnancy. And in lines 17 and 18, the comedian further points to the social responsibility arising out of endorsements by celebrities. Due to the existing social taboo in India, a pregnancy test kit used by an unmarried woman is expected to bring shame and embarrassment for her family members, and endorsement of such a test kit by a celebrity to drive home the normality of pregnancy in a way skips the effort of an unmarried woman undertakes to safeguard the relationship with her family members. There is another video as well. So here in line 1, the fact that a mother urges her daughter to engage in sexual activities only after marriage brings forth the deep-seated role of matrimony in Indian social setting as a social license for sex leading to procreation. And the conversation between a mother and a daughter in lines 3 to 7 reflects the restriction imposed on female sexual liberation, while at the same time demonstrates how an unmarried woman, Indian woman, champions this liberation by being unabashedly true about her desires. In lines 11 and 12, the humor is generated by distinguishing between expectations from an unmarried woman by her parents and her own choices in terms of love and lust, channeling the attention of audience to the absence of sexual agency as a concept in India. This is another one. So dark skin, it's by a performer named Sai Kiran. Dark skin, I'm getting married. Here in line 5, the person, Sai Kiran, says that my mother, I love my mother, but she is not satisfied. She wants to be a grandmother. She tells me, make me a grandmother. So in line 5, this particular phrase, make me a grandmother, nudges the audience towards setting up the stage. It begins by exploring the expectations of a married woman in the Indian context to fulfill all her roles, commencing from her role of being a mother, from being a wife to being a mother, and finally being a grandmother. And so there are different, I will not go into details of all this because I think because of the time constraints. Another one is of this is the final extract. So here he talks about the humor, which is because of by comparing expectations from a dating website and a matrimonial website, wherein the former is construed as an arena offering access to only men who are typically considered to be good looking according to Indian beauty standards, while the latter acts as a last resort for men rejected according to these standards. And then we makes a comparison between the context of NRI, IIT, and IIM, which are the IIT and IIM are the two premier chains of institutions in India, and NRI is a non-resident Indian, and how and he talks about this marriage market and all this. So he brings into the context how marriage itself is like a business from which the dating websites, matrimonial websites are gaining, are making profit at the expense of the people. And so as evident from all these extracts, speakers deliberately delve into topics like choice of women in terms of pregnancy and sexual freedom, dark skin and beauty standards, marriage as a marketplace to assess attitudes, structure, and ego involvement of the audience. So the social contestation related to these issues is a testimony in itself to the fact that such topics lie at the edges of their latitude of acceptance and therefore require persuasion on the part of the performer. It is through claps and laughter of the audience that the speaker is assured of achieving an essential purpose of humor, a shifting perspective of the audience, triggering the dormant aspect of social judgment and leading to a higher degree of self-involvement, which is the primary focus of a stand-up performance. And that is that the dormant aspect of social judgment is what lies in the latitude of non-commitment. An important dimension to this discussion involves othering, that is the other's other, which contends that in comparison to other, which is devoid of a voice of its own, the other's other is able to renew the discourse on marginality owing to undesirable characteristics and relatively neutral difference. And therefore, in the context of stand-up comedy, the knowledge about something forbidden tickles the audience as the forbidden identity is socially not acceptable and hence designated as the other. The laughter as response to this humor is an acknowledgement of the existence of this other's other and thus contributes to the creation of an identity which is labeled as derogatory and yet amuses the audience at their own expense. In short, there is a simultaneous functioning of identities leading to the switch from one identity to the next one in the order of the self, the other, and the other's other in the process of internalizing stand-up comedy. Now, since I've mentioned that I am trying to understand general semantics and I'm very new to this concept of general semantics. So I was trying to figure out if the concepts from general semantics can be used to understand stand-up comedy in general. So these three concepts, the principles, three principles of principle of non-identity, principle of non-allness, and principle of self-reflectiveness. So when we look into that, the first one is, of course, the map is not the territory, the principle of non-identity. So we are map makers, making mental maps of the world that we encounter and sharing them with others. And our most important maps are not drawn, but spoken and written down. Hence, Korzybski also insisted that the word is not the thing it represents. So this is the one that we look in when we see the stand-up comedy, or when we are part of a stand-up performance as an audience. You see that what the performer says and what he or she implies is different from the actual words. So therefore, map is not the territory is applicable to these performances. Another one is principle of non-allness. This principle states that our perception and knowledge about any given event or object is necessarily incomplete, and all the more so are depictions and descriptions. Returning to the map metaphor, the principle of non-allness reminds us that maps do not represent all the territory. And by the same token, words do not say all there is to say about any phenomena. There is always more to be said, and there are some things that words cannot describe, and which is, again, if we look into a stand-up performance, we would see it's not only the words that the performer uses, but how the audience reacts to this. Sometimes they clap, sometimes they make noises, sometimes and in response, sometimes the performer himself or herself makes gestures. So these are the different things that that complete a performance, a stand-up performance. So that is again applicable to stand-up comedy as well. And finally, the principle of self-reflectiveness, whereas reality refers to nothing apart from itself, representations have the potential to be self-referential, that is to refer back to themselves or to other representations. Some of our statements may be about the world as we experience it, but we can also make statements about statements and statements about those statements and so on. We can react to our reactions, evaluate our evaluations, question our questions, and so forth. This, of course, may lead us further and further away from reality, and therefore is an inherent characteristic of and potential problem of language and symbolic communication. Moreover, self-reflectiveness suggests subjectivity, as that ideal map would also include the individual looking at the map and perhaps even the map maker if he or she are present. So this self-reflectiveness, this subjectivity is also important because, as I mentioned, that in a stand-up comedy, but both the audience and the performer, both of them require that they share the cultural knowledge, because of which the performance becomes meaningful. So of course, someone from another country, probably if they are watching an Indian stand-up performance, they might not understand some of the context, and for which the jokes would fall flat. So that is again the subjectivity and self-reflectiveness, which becomes important when we are analyzing stand-up comedy. So yeah, so with this, the conclusion, as I've mentioned, and that was about the presentation. And so thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Tanima. That was longer than 15 minutes. Very
I'm so sorry
interesting.
for that.
And we may have some more time to ask some questions when we get to that part. Our next presenter is Asmita Kundu from Balvant Parekh Center for General Semantics and Other Human Sciences in India. And the topic of the presentation is understanding the experience of secularism through a general semantics perspective. Asmita?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm honored to have the opportunity to present today. So I'll share my screen. 1 second. Yeah, so today I'll be discussing the intricate relationship between secularism and general semantics. And specifically, I'll try to explore how the principles of general semantics, which, by the way, I'm also kind of an amateur in, like they shed light on our understanding of secularism. By experience, I mean one's possible understanding of the concept of secularism, varied meanings of the word secular as a political doctrine, philosophy, and also as an individual choice, and also how it can perhaps be envisioned as an ethical practice. So first, I have outlined the key research questions and objectives that I have over here. I aim to investigate how secularism functions both as a semantic category and as an element within semantic transactions. That is, it is a product of language and how it features in interpersonal or intercommunal conversations. Additionally, I seek to comprehend secularism as a polysemic category, exploring its various meanings and interpretations, addressing the ambiguities inherent in the diverse definitions of secularism is another crucial objective that I have. I also want to examine the polemic surrounding the perception of secularism as an unquestioned ethical given, that is, thinking of it as an a priori understanding that secularism is inherently a self-sufficient category for ensuring ethics, justice, etc. Finally, we will explore the potential applications of general semantics practices in ethically navigating through secularism. Now, the word secular, the concept secular itself has been a rather contentious category, and recent scholarly works have explicated upon the ambiguous nature of its implications. I have delved into a very brief overview of the same. And here I want to talk about the polysemic nature of the term secular as elucidated by Charles Taylor. He's a leading scholar of secularism in his work. He explains that initially secular was defined in opposition, but not as an antagonism to the sacred. That is, they were kind of complementary to one another, and they simply meant like profane time and worldly matters, that is, as it featured in like Latin Christendom. However, over time, especially from the 17th century onwards, a new understanding emerged wherein the secular encompassed all of existence, and the transcendent was viewed as a human creation, and the immanent, that is the worldly, was understood as a divine creation, where we can see that the distinction is getting a little bit more stark, but it's still fairly complementary to one another. However, the concept evolved further during the French Revolution, leading to the notion of laicite, which emphasized independence of the state from religious influence. In contemporary multicultural societies, however, secularism has become a political doctrine that acknowledges religiosity as one of the many possibilities. And here, religion need not be interfered with, but can also be protected as a right or an individual choice on a case-to-case basis. Now, Taylor gives like this quote where he basically summarizes this, which I would like to read out. And he says that the secular and the sacred binary, it started off as a term in a dyad which distinguishes two dimensions of existence, identifying them by the kind of time essential to each. But then, building on the clear immanent transcendent distinction, it mutates into a term in another dyad where secular refers to what pertains to a self-sufficient immanent sphere, and its contrasting term relates to the transcendental realm. This can undergo a further mutation via denial of this transcendental realm into a dyad in which one term refers to the real, the secular, and the other to what is merely invented, or where secular refers to the institutions we really require to live in this world, and religious or ecclesiastical to optional areas, or optional extras that often disturb the course of this worldly life. Now, secularism has played out in India in a rather, like how it has played out is a rather complicated phenomena, but it has grown to have its own idiosyncratic variations that sometimes converge with the West, however, also differs a lot in many ways. Here, I have highlighted the diverse attitudes and understandings of secularism within the Indian context. Now, the constitutional version of secularism in India ranges from non-interference to non-sectarianism, where one of the primary goal is neutrality and insistence on religious equality. Historically, anxieties regarding secularism in India have included its perception as a colonial tool of governance and control, its incompatibility with a society deeply invested in religiosity, and its development as a philosophy or a political practice, which in the West, which did, and in India, it did not follow the same trajectory. Additionally, secularism in India, unlike the West, in most parts of the West, absolutely coincided with the advent of democracy, and is often largely the constitutional term, like the official constitutional inclusion was much later on, and it is viewed as more as a democratic inevitability, reflecting the complex interplay between secularism, governance, and social dynamics. Now, the core values or ideas that are associated with this Indian brand of secularism in popular political parlance is inclusive of a wide range of categories, which I have mentioned a few. That is to say, when popularly people refer to what is secular or secularism, they can mean any host of these things, depending on who is talking and what they mean. It can mean non-sectarianism for some, it can mean a distance from religion, it can be outrightly anti-religious for some people. For at least in the beginning of the post-colonial era, it was understood largely as being very close to rationality, modernity, or scientific thinking. However, these are different amongst themselves. What is interesting, in fact, in Indian political conception is that whenever there is a coexistence of more than one religion in any given public sphere, people think of it as secular. So if there's a church and a temple, people just like being there at the same place, that is what a lot of Indians would call as secular. And any act of tolerance, however performative it may be, that can also be considered as secular. However, in the scholarly largely scholarly domain, there have been some categorizations that has been made about the various brands of secularism as it specifically pertains to India. Of these are Nehruvian, which is the somewhat the constitutional version, which is like distance from religion, but not outrightly atheistic. But however, there were a lot of Marxist communist parties in India who believed in like largely believed in a more atheistic brand of governance and politics. And then there was also this radical secularism in India, which talks about largely radically transforming our notions of what is religion and what is religious, and all the categories that we know of so far. A slightly different from that is a transgressive secularism, which wants to address self-critique, like secularism as an ever-flowing critical discourse where it criticizes itself. And of course, there are other scholars, historians, who also talk about a reliance on an indigenous brand of secularism, which is to look for conceptions of pure, equality and coexistence and cooperation, which existed in Hinduism or Islam or other traditions that are native to India. Right. So, one second. Yeah. Now, I have tried to propose an approach to understanding secularism through the lens of general semantics. Firstly, a general semantics perspective necessitates the recognition of secularism as a polysemic category, acknowledging its multiple meanings and interpretations. Secondly, it highlights the context-sensitive nature of secularism, illustrating how it manifests through various geopolitical identity and academic orientations at both individual and community levels. Additionally, secularism is expressed through specific constitutional clauses, the relationship between the state, the citizens, the argumentative goals in politics, all of which involve semantic exchanges. And finally, a general semantics perspective would be to view secularism as a historically evolving category that continues to evolve and acquire new dimensions for progressive thinking, which would be in connection to general semantics terms and known as time binding, where it is knowledge that would be progressively passed down to each generation. Now here it's one of the general semantists in his essay, Eldon Siemens, he has spoken about the barriers of in religious communication, where he is basically suggesting like these can be like personal motivations, changing environment, linguistic evolution. Why I have included that is I feel that that can also be like legitimate categories to understanding barriers in how a group refuses to acknowledge the other as secular or vice versa, or does not understand why they might not want to call them as such. Right. So, and over here, I'm not getting into all of them, just one example as when we think of barriers of linguistic evolution in secularism, specifically when it comes to India, the category secularism also was very, very prominent, and the initiation of that was due to the initiation of English education. So even if there are comparable concepts of like alike secularism somewhat that exist in the linguistic or the cultural systems, people automatically will have a different idea of secular, what secular is, purely because it's an English term. Yeah. Now there can be challenges and critiques surrounding the perception of secularism as an unquestioned ethical given, which can be determined as a result of total omission of context sensitivity and understanding of general semantics in the application of secularism. Firstly, there's the issue of interchangeability with constitutional or legal mandates, where legality is prioritized over ethical consideration. An example of this could be seen in the implementation of secular laws that might not necessarily address underlying ethical concerns. Secondly, this approach to secularism often fails to acknowledge existing social hierarchies that continue to exert systemic influence, for example, in India, such as the caste dynamics or racial inequalities in Western societies. And as an example, there's a persistence of caste-based discrimination in India despite constitutional secularism, because secularism without context sensitivity often leads to the belief that caste hierarchies, which in India is a result of authoritative Hinduism, where certain castes continue to enjoy systemic privilege, is entirely denied in the hope of creating a blank slate for governance devoid of religiosity. And this in turn is used to deny any affirmative action or special protection that is required for the oppressed caste. Thirdly, secular language can be co-opted as empty rhetoric or performative language, divorcing it from its ethical and contextual significance. Politicians or leaders might use secular rhetoric without addressing the underlying ethical issue. Now, when we think of application of general semantics, a lot of the arguments is heavily inspired from Bruce Kodish's work on ethics and his thesis on adulthood of humanity, where he talks about secular humanism through general semantics. Now, firstly, by embracing the principle of non-allness, we acknowledge the limitations of our understanding and create more nuanced and inclusive map of secularist and ethical practices. This helps in addressing the ethnocentric or religious biases that may influence our perception of secularism. Secondly, by considering levels of abstraction, we recognize the diverse perceptions and experience of secularism among individuals and communities. And this can shed light on the levels of privilege and contribute to a more just application of secular principles. And lastly, the conception of time binding emphasizes understanding secularism in the context of its historical evolution, highlighting both its progress and the challenges hindering its ethical application, such as jingoism, communalism, and intolerance. By understanding secularism through a time-binding lens, we can identify ways to promote its ethical practices and address hindrances to its evolution. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asmita. We now move on to our fourth and last paper of this panel. This is by David Levine, from my colleague from the College of Management and Academic Studies. And the title of his paper is It Touches Us, a comprehensive model for explaining preferences for using paper media as an alternative to equivalent digital products. David, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Let me talk about a paper in the 21st century. In the last third decade of the 21st century, people and institutions have continued to use paper or plastic-based media alongside with digital media. There's some evidence for this. First, printed books are still more popular compared to digital books, according to PU and other data. Many students prefer to write using a pen on paper and prepare for exam with a stack of pages in their hand, for my personal experience, and maybe other of them. Important documents are stored as in hard copies. Think about a will or a judgment or something like this. A renewed update appearance of old media products, such as a Polaroid camera and vinyl records, has been observed. This is another one. Another example, Polaroid cameras is very popular today, according to research, according to my students also. There is some explanation in the literature, according to this phenomena. First, there are field-dependent studies, acquisition of academic knowledge, leisure activities, and institutional sociology, but there are field dependent. I have more than 100 items in my data. Most of them, more of them are dealing with academic knowledge, paper versus keyboard, for example. Leisure activities, mostly about vinyl record using. And there are some works about a document or PDF versus a paper document. There are studies focused on the social context without technological emphasis at all, like explaining this phenomenon in nostalgica or post-digital. So they are not technological, and this is what I think it's problematic. Studies that focus on the moment of touch, mostly about smartphone, and mix between paper-based media and digital message box. They treat it as the same, but this technological is not the same. It's not the same at all. My basic
David,
theory.
sorry to interrupt you. We're seeing, I think it must be all of us. We're seeing your last slide. All we could see was, okay, now we can see.
Okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. My major theory in my work is the affordances, the technological affordances theory. Definition, multi-phase relational structure between an object technology and the user that enable or constrain, important word, enable or constrain, not imposed, potential behavior outcome in a particular context. This is made by Evans. There is essential aspects not open to interpret it, the characteristics that are part of the essence of the object, regardless of a human or not human perspective. This is neutral. There is affordances or aspect and dynamic and variable component that is neither the object nor the product. Can be defined as a requirement, request, posed by the object technology, some kind of recommended in many degrees, which line of action is encouraging, discouraging, or refuse to do something. Like I said, some degrees. And there is outcomes. Outcome aspects are the behavior outcomes, such as collecting books or producing printed document. There's treat this variable. When we go to a paper base, as the essential aspects, touch-based interaction has materiality. This is essential. External boundaries for each object. It's different from the immateriality boundaries between document in the message box, like in the smartphone. The affordances aspect, I suggest stability, means encourage subjects to examine the durability of the certain item, like its thickness, and its fixation, or the degree it's of difficult to edit or to change the message. This is a variable. Differentiation means demand from the subject to treat two pieces of paper as separate and not one unit. Outcome aspects, the behavior outcomes such as collecting books or producing printed document or something like this. This is the model, and my specific model, I call it a touches us model. The touches us model use aspect of affordances, stability, and differentiation to explain the popularity of paper-based media in the 21st century. The model is multidimensional and refers to a behavior outcome both individual, you can call this macro-analysis, or institutional, like a banknote. People still use banknotes or holy books, printed holy books. The meaning of the outcomes are in some case pragmatic, like learning aids that get students to get better mark. In others, symbolic. Family photos mean that people can treat it a picture like a human being. This is in research. Now I turn to another file I have, in which I demonstrate my model. Well, sorry. If we are talking about learning aids as an area, affordances, stability, differentiation, stability or fixation, printed text discourage changes. It's much harder to change them comparing to digital one. Differentiation, the printed text demand examination of each text separately and not all together. What are the outcomes? Printed sources facilitate orientation of the text. Students can better decide which is in the beginning of the text and in the end of the text than they do in print in digital. They can do it in print in digital, but it's more hard to do. Printer sources enable integration between sources. This is true.
Oh, you got the tone. You know that voice, or I think you do, but for the
and prevent digital destruction. When you hold a printed copy, you can't jump to another one. It's harder to jump to another one. Discipline is cognitive psychology. Level and context of meaning making is micro and pragmatic, how to get a better mark. Well, when we look at leisure album photos, we can talk about affordances, stability, fixation, durability. Printed photos refuse to edit, like putting filters and so on. To edit and encourage preservation over time. People prefer to print important photos. Differentiation, printed pictures encourage sorting. Important, less important. Outcome, people prefer printing photos they consider important and save them in albums rather than online. There is a industry of digital albums in many places. Discipline, psychology, sociology, cultural studies, memory studies. A level of context of meaning, micro and pragmatic, but it's also symbolic. There is two levels of meaning here. The third one is when we talk about reading books, affordances. The printed book as a bundle of pages demand to be distinguished from other books. Outcome, human declare and externalized ownership of book copies. There is problem to declare ownership of a digital copy of a book. It's much easier to declare ownership on a printed copy. Discipline, micro sociology, critical sociology. This is because ownership is connected also to social status and so on. And it's dependent on micro, macro, symbolic, and so on. The last one is an area of paper-based media, institutional tools. I can talk about documents. There are more examples. Stability, the paper in which the document is printed encourage assessment by touch, its fixation and durability over time. Differentiation, the paper also demand refer to its border. And what are the outcomes? The outcomes: institutions make use of printed document to make to mark the solidity of their promise. Think about a bachelor degree document or so on. Distinguish between them and other institutions, between their document and other institutions, or between an institution and not institutional document, like the toll of paper, something like this. Institutional psychology, it's the discipline, level and context of make meanings, macro, pragmatic, symbolic. This is practical and also symbolical. I go back to. Is this right? It's okay? Eva? Okay. Okay. Just a minute. Okay. Key conclusion from the table. Stability and differentiation are aspects of affordances and serve as starting point for a variety of potential behavior outcomes, a wide range of studies in different disciplines. Diversity and multidimensional means in the making meaning level, a diverse field of knowledge, diverse context, micro, macro. Mapping and comparison make it possible to examining the point of similarity and differences. For instance, the preference for print document is something linked to cognitive motivation, like acquiring knowledge by using a printed book, and something to symbolic, like collecting books and show them to external your social status or something like this. Why it's innovative? I don't think that my model is innovative. For some reason, interdisciplinary. It touches us model of a theoretical superstructure concerning the survival of paper-based media product in many fields, in many academic and maybe also outside academia. Its alternative framework for touch moment paradigm, which relates mostly to touch-based digital media. It's something else because in print you have to touch every item separately. In a smartphone, you touch once, you touch the box. Alternative framework to post-digital theory and nostalgic studies that ignore the material aspects. They mix between Nintendo and paper or time machine. A proposal for new division of history of communication research, touching the not between old media and new media, but touching the object versus touching the box. The history began, for my opinion, by the invention of the radio on television, which are the first in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. I'm just looking. We're supposed to finish this panel right now. We're supposed to be after the questions, but what do you say, Lance? If there's a question or two, maybe
Sure.
we know it. Yeah. Okay. So if anybody has any questions to any of the speakers,
I have a question for Chris.
go ahead, Bob.
Yep.
Chris, I was intrigued by seeing the camera in the middle of the forehead of the Robothespian. And we, all of us as actors and actants, I guess, base our actions on sensory input. Are there Robothespians now in 2024 that have more sources of input and can therefore through AI actually make actions that are autonomous?
Yeah. The thing about what a robot sees is it's kind of arbitrary in designing a robot where the cameras are. So they could be outside the body of the robot, and so the way that it senses space and objects and bodies can be quite heterogeneous. So, for example, the way that the Tesla senses the cars that are around it. So it doesn't it's not reducible to the human kind of sensorium. So I guess that does kind of raise questions about, how we can relate to these, invocation reactants when they don't share our, yeah, as I said, I don't think it's useful to argue that the human argue about the sort of the difference between the human and the non-human. I think they're radically different, but they're also capable of acting. So the Tesla is able to avoid hitting things most of the time, and I'm able to avoid hitting things most of the time. And in the situation of driving, that's kind of what matters. But there's a whole lot of other, like social robotics, are trying to create interactions between humans and robots that are somehow modeled on human sociality. And so, yeah, that's kind of the controversial question at the moment is, what can a robot actually perform social relationships?
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
For David, I think it was David. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, was it David? Was it you who mentioned touching the object instead of the box?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what he said.
Yeah. So what would be the box for you? What would be the constituents of the box?
The box is represented of the idea of efficiency. We don't anymore to want to touch any text separately. We want to chat everything at all. This is much of the idea of digital nowadays, to be more efficient. So maybe in our world, we think about things otherwise, like post-digital. I don't think that the post-digital is wrong, but I think the post-digital represents itself in materiality. So digital represents itself in materiality. The box is digital. It's digital ideological also, not just materiality.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we can have one more question before we break.
Well, I'll just comment on that because Milton connected David's presentation to the idea that maps, with the map not being the territory, that maps made of different material are different ways of representing the territory. And so a map on paper is different from a digital map. And I think another aspect of that, especially about maps, but it does extend beyond that, bringing in some media ecology and specifically the more phenomenological kind of approach of McLuhan and others, is that when you think about a map on paper, that is an objective stance that we relate to the territory. That is, when you look at the map on paper, you're outside of the territory, not inside the territory. And in general semantics, we often bring up that that gets lost with self-reflexiveness, that we forget to place ourselves inside the map. But with digital maps, when you think about GPS, that places you inside the territory. And McLuhan connected that to acoustic space, that when you listen, you're at the center of the world, inside the world, and that when we become visual, which happens through literacy in the alphabet, and particularly in Greco-Roman, that secular culture that we were also hearing about, or at least Western secular culture, that takes us outside the world and gives us the illusion that there's us separate from nature or separate from the world. So in an interesting way, electronics brings us back into what McLuhan referred to as acoustic space, or which is an ecological position to be in. So that becomes kind of a different aspect, David, of what you were talking about. And one of the ways that media ecology sort of encompasses many of these different ideas like materiality, but also sense perception and form and so forth. And incorporating that general semantics approach as well.
Thank you.
We said that would be a last question, but I see a hand up.
Heiner, yeah.
Heiner Banking, if you have a question,
Yes.
go ahead.
I feel enthused, and I wonder if any one of you have thought about bringing maps and extensional immersive models together, because if you create an extra space model like a scaffolding to have pointers to possibilities that you can negotiate and have just a three-dimensional map of scenes. So anyway, that's what's making me tick since 34 years, and maybe we can discuss it further another time. I understand that in English, you often only think about mathematical models, but there are artistic models, architectural models, painters models, and not just girls on the pet stage. Catwalk, or whatever you call it.
Well, thanks, Heiner. Ava, I think we do have to.
Yeah, we do have to finish. Thank you so much to all our 4 presenters. That was fascinating. Lance, do we have time for a short break before the next panel?
Yes, we have about 8 minutes and then start up again.
So we'll reconvene at 1/2 past the hour. Thank you.